Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am super excited because we have a longtime friend of Mysterious Galaxy, Raymond Feist, as well as co-owner who is going to be our lead moderator and bringing all of your amazing questions and some of his own that you submitted to the event tonight. I'm going to go ahead and disappear because you are in awesome hands with Matt, and I am going to go ahead and let him take it away. Have an amazing event, everyone. Make sure to, if you have questions, comment them down below because I'll pass them along to Matt. And also too, we're going to be selecting people who submit questions. We have 5 signed books that we're going to be giving away that are super exclusive, never published in the US. So amazing, awesome giveaway. Thank you, Raymond. And Matt, take it away.
Thank you so much, Constance. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you, Raymond. I'm a huge fan, and like I said earlier, I've been in your world since I think I was 4 years old. I was first introduced to Krondor and Midkemia in video game form, but then I, of course, went on to read a bunch of the novels. And now we're here to learn about your new Firemane Saga, book 2, which is just out today. So to start off, do you want to tell us a little bit about this new series that you're working on?
Not really.
Okay.
No, the problem with it is that I just done a series of print interviews, and so tell us about your book. Spoilers. The pithiest thing I could come up with is all my characters think things are great, and then things get nasty really quickly. For those who haven't read King of Ashes, do so. I'll wait. Anyway, the idea here is that the first book in the series was a setup. It was an introduction, obviously. It was to create the relationships between various characters and in the background world that they exist in. This is the one where things really start to happen. And I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm going to be pretty vague about most of this. Characters grow. You know, when I started with King of Ashes, I created cultures that are very different than the ones I had done in the Riftwar Cycle. This is a criminal culture, the island of Gwalchan, and the hidden kingdom, you know, the kingdom of night. And it's basically a meld in my mind between the Iga ninjas and Capone's outfit in Chicago. You know, it's sort of organized crime with ninjas. And I had a lot of fun creating that. But I even got a letter from one guy who said, "Why are you normalizing horrible things?" And I went, "I'm not, you know, I'm writing about this made up culture. And it's certainly not an attempt to be prescriptive and say, we need to do this in our world now. It's simply, you know, how these people operate." So what I was left with at the end of King of Ashes is 3 of my main characters, or 4 of my main characters, actually, if you count Dante as the 4 youngsters. They're still young. I mean, they're late teens, early 20s, not even college finished, but they're married and starting businesses and things like that. So I came away with this one remaining thought. They still have a great deal to learn. And we start the lessons in Queen of Storms. The book is going to reveal. I like using the analogy of it's like peeling an onion. You know, you get a layer off and guess what? You got another layer. And I've done that pretty consistently throughout my career, where I love when a reader says, "I didn't see that coming, but it makes sense." And so I'll say this. Queen of Storms is when the game gets real and the stakes go up. And we start seeing the first hints of just how vast the conflict that's coming, for lack of a better way of putting it, the issues that are confronting the characters are. That's about as much as I can cover without getting into spoilers. And so it's probably not a terribly satisfying answer, but it's the only one you're going to get tonight.
That's okay. You know, I really love how much you focus on these youngsters, as you called them, and we get their perspective, but in the background, you see all of these things happening in the shadows and with the politics and religion. And I'm so excited to crack into this one to see how these sort of blossom into this really rich world that you're setting up here, which gets us into our first question from Lee on Twitter, which is, what elements of this series set it apart from your Riftwar series?
Well, we start with the fact that it's the same author, so there's going to be similarities in style and approaches to storytelling. So in that case, you're stuck with me. There are other people out there writing other books if you don't want that. But what I tried to do here was get away from the great galloping nations that I had in Midkemia. Okay, the entire world of Garn is a great deal more like the continent of Novendus in the Riftwar Cycle. City-states, small principalities, warlords, robber barons, that kind of thing. There are these 5 kingdoms which on the northern Tembria are a big deal. The twin continents, the twins they call them. Those 5 kingdoms are sort of like the big deals. But by the Empire of Great Kesh or the Kingdom of the Isles, these are small potatoes. These are country village type undertakings compared to the great continent spanning political entities that I had in Magician to Magician's End. I tried to get into some different underpinnings for how relationships work. It's authors, I think, are often trapped by their own cultural built-in biases, I guess. It's like I grew up like most white boys from the San Fernando Valley in the 50s and 60s, reading European history, reading British history, reading American history. So when I discovered things like the history of the Malagasy, people and the great empires in Africa, Timbuktu, and then obviously the Egyptians for several thousand years, and then Asia, the Khmer Empire, for instance. I didn't learn about that till I was in my 20s. That was very exotic, wonderful stuff, and I wanted to go revisit that feeling. And I don't know if I achieved it or not, but I wanted Garn to really feel different than anything you'd seen on Makimi or Kelowon. Kelowon is obviously very Asian influenced. Jani spent time in Korea. And I mean, I did sketching outlines, and she brought the paint and the color and the depth and the vision to the Empire series. And I mixed in a little Mesoamerican culture with the religions, and some Zulu MPs for the military stuff. But Midkemia was very, very clearly designed to be the kingdom anyway. The Kingdom of the Isles was really sort of a knockoff of Western, vaguely Northern feudal Middle Ages. And I think that most of us tend to default to that if we don't really give it some thought. And all of that's window dressing. It's just, do you want the sugar cone or do you want the cake cone for your vanilla ice cream? It's the kind of thing where I find myself thinking of characters first, and then where I put them and what's around them comes second. So that's kind of the way I operate. But mostly to answer your question, it was just create a different vibe.
I have to say, I think your stories are more waffle cone than either of those two options, which is the best option.
Except that, when I was a kid, if you weren't careful, you'd wear it on your shirt.
That's true. Still, as an adult, it happens. So obviously the Riftwar Saga cycle became 30 odd books, right?
Mm-hmm.
You planning a similarly epic scope
I hope
for
not.
These characters?
I hope I'm able to, in terms of, I hope I'm still upright and taking solid food, 10, 15 years from now. When you get to be my age, there's a wonderful documentary, which I heartily endorse, that I saw a couple of years ago on HBO or Showtime or wherever. And the title is a quote from the late brilliant Carl Reiner, who we just recently lost. And the title is, First I Read the obituary page. And so the title is, First I Read the obit, and if I'm not in it, I have breakfast. And it's a wonderful examination of people in their 90s. And one of the really revelatory things for me was discovering that on serious research, people in their 90s are the happiest population in general, if they have their health. You know, if there's not dementia or you know, being bedridden or all the horrible things that can happen with the elderly. But well, active, happy 90, you know, it's like every day's a gift. And you just love it. So yeah, so I hope I'm around that long. 30 more books, I don't know, you know, it's like maybe, but this one, I haven't nailed down a couple of elements that I actually need to discuss with my editor, probably next week or the week after. The ever amazingly talented and bright Jane Johnson, who is, you know, my editor in the UK. And a very fine writer in her own right. I'm sure you have many of her titles sitting in your store. But there's a couple of things I want to do in this book, and without, again, spoilers, it's like the one I'm working on now, by the way, not the one you hopefully are buying. It's Master of Furies, and I pitched one idea to Jane already, and she said, "Wow, if you can do that without being cheesy, that'd be great." And that's what rings in my mind. Okay, so how to do this without, you know, if you can get away with it, this is great. You know, if you can't, don't do it. So I have a couple of those plot twists in mind. And a couple of them are actually pretty big and could lead to further works down the road. My problem with the Riftwar thing was I didn't know that I was ever going to write a second book. I didn't know if I was going to sell the first one. So when I wrote Magician, because I was familiar with the world, you know, because I gamed in it in college, I wrote it in a way that nothing was overtly saying, here comes a sequel. At least I don't think there was. You know, if there was, I don't take responsibility for it. It was my evil subconscious doing things without asking me. So I ended up writing 30 books, mostly because once I finished A Darkness of Sethanon and said, aha, I'm done, my editor at the time, Adrian Zackheim, moved over to Morrow and left me in the tender mercies of a couple of very good editors, actually, who, because they hadn't worked with me before, sat down and read all 3 books in a row. And then the first question was, okay, what happens next? And I mean, what do you mean next? I mean, there is no next. Well, yeah, but you got, you know, okay, like Arutha's kids. Oh, hell. Prince of the Blood. And then the younger son. You know, and by that time I had gotten hip deep in working on the Empire series with Janny, because I always wanted to do the other side of the Riftwar. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I just did an interview with a radio station talk about your mind going. I got up at 4 o'clock this morning to talk to London, so that's my excuse. And I haven't started drinking yet, so I don't even have that working for me. But I was doing a radio interview where somebody said, the other side of the Riftwar, the Empire series, you know, nobody's ever done that. And I was thinking at the time, well, yeah, not in fantasy, but I remember devouring Lawrence Durrell's Alexandria Quartet. Not because it was riveting. I mean, it was, but insanely clever. You know, 4 characters, you know, Montaliv, Balthazar, Klee, and I forgot the 4th one. It'll come to me like 4 in the morning. The same story, but told from 4 different points of view. You know, like a 4-novel Rashomon, basically. And I loved that. I thought, okay, well, let's tell it from the Serrani point of view. So it took on a life of its own. It's like, what's next? I was doing Wrath of a Demon King. And I don't know why, I was like maybe a third of the way through it. And I sat back, I remember vividly, I sat back and my wife at the time, saw me stumbling out of my office with this sort of dazed expression, said, "What?" And I said, "I'm doing all 5 Rift Wars, aren't I?" And she looked at me like, "Yeah, I think you are." So who knows? My characters don't behave themselves. They tell me, "No, you just think that's what we're going to do, but we're actually going to go over here and do that." So yeah, I mean, I plan on Master of Furies being the last book in the Firemane Saga. It's not a guarantee.
Well, I think one of the problems that you set yourself up for, and you see this in Magician, is you create these really rich things, but you haven't fully fleshed them out. We just want to know more. So like in King of Ashes, right? There's clearly magic in this world, and
a different flavor.
Very different flavor. So do you want to give away anything about how
I'll
magic
say a little
is?
bit about that. Okay, a couple of things. I wanted to do religion, for example, from a political point of view. So I created the Church of the One as kind of a pastiche of the early rise of the Roman Catholic Church under Constantine, when, it was, hey, this is now the state religion. Well, I didn't do it one-on-one. I said, okay, but they're going to displace other religions. And then couple that with the rise of Islam and the creation of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And then a couple of other things as well, and the politics is very Renaissance. It's very back when, the Pope had his own army and he was out fighting with the people he excommunicated, that kind of thing. I mean, really political. Midkemia has no atheists, because if you haven't met a god, somebody has or knows somebody who has. I mean, they're around. That whole manifestation and ideation of imagined properties that humans imparted to the forces, the energies, what Nacor used to call stuff, that all was woven into the fabric of that world. So I didn't want that. I wanted very Earth-like in the sense that, well, nobody that I ever met ever had a conversation with any of the gods. I kind of went Roman on that, whereas the Greeks were pretty venerative of their gods. They really, as far as their mythos, had created this idea of the gods reflected human value and good and bad value. The Romans were duty bound. It's like, they worshiped their ancestors and they prayed to their ancestors. Really very tribal. And the Romans always were a very tribal people, even when they were conquering the world. If you were Etruscan, if you were the first people the Romans conquered, 400 years later, you were still a second-class citizen. Oh, they're okay, but they're Etruscans. They're not real Romans. And that lasted all the way up to the foundation of the empire. So you went to the holy rites on the field of Mars, not because you expected Mars to show up and, offer to buy the drinks, but because it was a duty, it was an obligation. If you're going on a sea voyage, you made a tithe to the temple of Poseidon, or Neptune in that case, and that sort of thing. So I wanted to go in that direction with everybody does what they have to do for, luck. It's like, I'm going across the ocean, so I'm tossing a coin to the temple of the sea god or whatever. Not that I believe in them, just that's what you do. So that allowed me to really focus on the politics of religion. And then on the magic side, it was like, I made it a sex-linked gene in theory, the fact that only women can use magic. Certain men, and I don't want to get too deep into this because it's sort of early spoiler stuff, have powers, let's say that they're ignorant of, that are masked. And they don't literally tap into them. They really don't access them the way women do. And so it's almost like ESP rather than magic mind reading. It's telekinesis rather than magically. So I'm really trying to nuance this there and shade it so that it feels like a completely different thing. So in terms of the story of the Firemane Saga, magic is important, but it's far less immediate than it was in the Rift War.
Yeah, but it adds to the richness of it, of like the excitement for this next book, because you know that there's so much more there to unpack. And so, like I said earlier, I'm really, really looking forward to getting my copy, which I do have, but have to start reading. Um, so we have so many questions. Let's see. We'll do some quick hits if that's okay.
Mhm.
All right, growing up, who was your favorite author?
Oh, that's a toughie. I mean, that's like saying, what's your favorite wine? What's your favorite piece of music? I'm sorry.
I mean, you only get one. I'm sorry.
Then it'll have to be Shakespeare.
That's a great answer.
No, I mean, the greatest writer in human history. I used to think when I was younger, trying to be politically correct, I guess. Well, the greatest writer in the English language. No, it's like he stole 90% of the stuff he wrote from like Italian playwrights and other sources. But we don't remember the people he stole from. We remember him. We still pay money to go see his stuff. I mean, 400 years after I die, if people are still paying money for my books, I'll take the ovation and, abstentia, as it were. No, he's a genius. I've seen Hamlet on stage 3 times now, and I've seen every movie version of it made. And the movies I've seen several times. I still can't tell you at the end of the book, or the end of the play or the end of the movie, whether Hamlet's faking it or he really did go insane. And that's brilliant. You can leave the audience or the reader with an unanswered question, as long as it's a really good question. Yeah, no, the guy just, he sparkled. I saw a production done in the accent of the 17th century. It's a whole different experience. I saw Twelfth Night, and there's humor in Shakespeare that we don't get because everybody sounds like they graduated from Eton, rather than they grew up in the East Side, they're East Enders. They went to they grew up near hearing the bells of Whitechapel, that kind of thing. There's rhyme in there that you don't hear in the modern pronunciations. There's internal rhyme. It's clever. As a writer, I appreciate it's not only brilliant, it's clever. It's original. And I don't know if you can get the recordings of that, but there's a couple of people who do that stuff in the patois of that era. And it's really alien to hear that at first, but 10, 15 minutes into it, your ear starts to adjust and you start picking up on stuff. And if you can see that stuff more than once, then it really makes a difference. But no, Shakespeare. And then, my father was old school. He, got thrown out of Columbia in his freshman year. So he claimed he had an Ivy League education. He never went to class. He was hosting illegal poker games in the dorm room, which is why he left college to go to Hollywood and direct movies and write scripts and other things. My dad was in the business. My grandfather was the East Coast vice president for Lowe's theater chain, which owned MGM at the time. So that's how my dad got into the business. And he would tell me lots of things. But one of the things he said was, look, you got to know Shakespeare. You got to know the Bible, even if you don't believe, simply because it's a foundational element of Western culture. In fact, I just ordered a copy of the Jewish Bible, which is sitting in another room. And one of these years when I actually have time to read, I'm getting caught up. I think I have my vacation coming up next year, and then take a little break and actually go someplace if I can. I live in San Diego, so it's like #1 vacation destination in America. So I may do a staycation, I think they call it. Rent a room down in Harbor Island or something, and just take a bunch of books, sit on the beach, drink those funny little cocktails with the paper umbrellas on them. I love history. I love biography. I very rarely read fiction anymore. And then he said, you got to read the Greeks and you got to read the Russians. And then he named out 4 or 5 other authors, including Melville and Twain and Jane Austen and Dickens, people like that. And that was the foundation of the Western culture. And I refer back to that comment I made earlier, your inbuilt biases culturally, the things you grew up with. So yeah, so if you're going to make me pick one, it's going to be, Little Willie Shakespeare and the Bards. one of my favorite bands.
So you mentioned a little bit about writing right now and the fact that you want to take a vacation. But how are you doing right now with the lockdown? Is it affecting the way you approach writing at all?
Yes.
Is it helping you stay focused?
No, you show me a person who isn't effective, and they're probably, you know, in a coma somewhere, or drunk, you know, or you know, living in a, you know, corrugated iron shack somewhere in the desert.
You're not one of those mythical people who learned a new language in these last 4 months?
Who knows? You know, I mean, I talked to Janie Wirtz just a few days ago, and I mean, she and her husband Don makes book, you know, terrific artists, both of them. They live in a very nice farm. You know, they have a few horses and dogs and whatever, and they're outside of Sarasota. They're a good, you know, half-hour drive. So they're out in the boonies. And as I tell people, for a writer, now that my kids have grown up and moved out, my son got married last year. He was my youngest. You know, self-isolation is a lifestyle. It's what I do. You know, I got a 3-year-old car that's got 6,000 miles on it. You know, back in the, you know, 20 years ago after my divorce, I spent about 12 years, you know, trying to recapture my youth, and I could write a whole book on that vanity. Talk about, you know, being dumber the second time around. But I was dating, I was dining, I was out 2-3 nights a week. You know, I was racking up the miles. But, you know, since I don't have to drive kids to school anymore and all that, you know, and my son's not borrowing my car because it's cooler than his. No, I don't go anywhere. I mean, I went to the post office today because, oh, joy, handing in my taxes, you know. At least I could pay them. That was nice. And then stopped off at the market and picked up a couple of things. And I probably won't leave the house again until, you know, next week sometime. So the answer to your question is that I'm okay and my routine hasn't changed, but the stress, it's crazy everywhere I look. I flip on the TV and I see stupid people doing really destructive things because morons have turned a health issue into a political wedge issue. And you know, it's the worst. I mean, there's a reason we have the highest infection rate and the highest death rate in the world now. You know, it's like even Brazil has managed to do a few things right. And I've been to Brazil, and there are a lot of lovely people down there. But you want to talk about your South American corrupt government. You know, I mean, we're not taking home any blue ribbons for smart reaction here. And the stress that's attendant with that, couple that with the Black Lives Matter and all of the social changes. In my life, you know, I tell people, if you want to know how I was raised, if you want to know what my world was like, go watch Mad Men. The very first episode, when they're talking about Nixon versus Kennedy, I was 14 years old. And if you watch that show, which was brilliantly realized, that was the culture I took for granted. You grew up as a white boy from the San Fernando Valley doing these things, and this is how you treated women, and this is how you looked at Jews, and this is how you looked at people of color, and this, you know. And it took me decades to unwrap that crap and relearn how I should be in the world I wanted to live in. And that wasn't an easy lesson. You know, anybody who looks back, you know, especially youngsters, and say, well, so-and-so is an evil person, because no, they were like in the mainstream for where the hell they were at that time, which, you know, you look at the society's evolution. So I've seen like the gay rights, you know, the gay rights thing did not start with Stonewall. Okay, that's when it got national headlines. But you can go back in history and see, you know, gay rights activism going back to the Civil War. I mean, 19th century stuff. But it was the last bit when suddenly this entire nation had a sea change in attitude. And suddenly, you know, we got 2 Trump appointees in the Supreme Court saying, yeah, no, gay people, LGBTQ people, trans people are protected by the very same things that you didn't want to give women 100 years ago, you know? Now that, you know, evolutionarily speaking, and I'm going to take a moment and point something out that a lot of people don't get. I didn't have a TV in my house till I was 7 years old. Okay. I listened to the radio as a little kid. There were no supermarkets. I remember when the first one was built in our neighborhood. Ooh, there's one place where you can go get bread and produce and meat and canned goods all in the same place. Because my mom used to go to the bakers and she used to go to the butchers. And then the grocery store was where the canned goods were and the sack goods, you know, sacks of beans and sacks of flour. And I lived in Los Angeles. This wasn't some farming community out in the middle of Bemidji, Minnesota. You know, this was LA in the late 50s. I mean the late 40s, early 50s. You know, I was born in 45. I was born 4 months after the end of World War II. And it took a while for the economy to get going and things to be changed, blah, blah, blah. But my point being, you know, we've been walking upright, you know, with opposable thumbs and all that for, depending on what biologists assume, 500,000 years, million years, maybe whatever. We've been, quote, civilized, unquote, maybe 12,000 years. And that's if you go back to Sumeria and the Hittites and Babylon and the first, you know, dynasty of Egypt. And Egypt was around for 4,000 years before the Romans showed up. Cleopatra was born closer to the iPhone than she was to the Great Pyramids of Cheops. Okay, scale. We've been industrial for about 300 years or so, 4 if you want to be really generous on what constitutes heavy industry. You know, the Industrial Revolution started in what, the late 18th, early 19th century. We've been technological for 50 years, people. You know, this, ooh, my vanishing iPhone. I just noticed how the virtual thing makes it go away. There's more computational power in my phone, or as my friend Rich likes to say, the computer I make phone calls on, than put Neil Armstrong on the moon. Go watch Apollo 13. You know, when they get into trouble, the guys break out slide rules. Okay. And probably a whole lot of the people watching this have no idea what a slide rule is, what it looks like, and what it does. So how do I feel about the changes around me? I think we have the opportunity in race relationships to see what we just saw recently with gay rights. I certainly hope so. Because, you know, we're at a crossroads. And as I've said to you before, out of chaos comes opportunity, but we got to do it right. We got to not screw it up. So yeah, I'm excited by this, but I'm also scared of it. So I sit here, you know, I don't got anybody to talk to unless I pick up the phone and call somebody, or they call me. And there's always that distracting itch to flip on the TV and see what's happening now. Because, you know, 24/7 news. I remember when news was on, you know, the local TV channel for 15 minutes. And then I think it was 58? When CBS went to a half hour. I mean, yeah. Now, you know, now how many, we got CNBC, we got MSNBC, we got Fox News. We have, I don't have a lot of respect for those guys. We have Al Jazeera, we've got BBC World, you know, it's just, you know, anytime you need the news, hell, you know, 24-hour sports. You know, I'm a fan of English Premier League, Wolverhampton Wanderers, that's my team. I could, you know, flip it on and watch, you know, a replay of the entire game they played 3 days ago against, you know, Arsenal or whoever. Anyway, that was not a quick hitter. Hey, give me another question or two before these people get bored and go watch reruns of Frasier.
So there's no shortage of things to do in the world or to entertain yourselves with. Most of it's news right now. Wouldn't call it entertaining either. But Kristen wants to know what inspired you to become a writer. And I would add on to that just a little bit more on what you were just saying. How has your relationship to writing changed in your career?
Okay, the short version was, I grew up in Hollywood. My dad was a producer, writer, director. I mentioned that. And I thought I was going to be a director. I was a theater major for a couple of years, and I got a job at 20th Century Fox. Hated it. I manipulated, because this is California state law stuff. I manipulated it so I got fired instead of quit, because that way, like unemployment insurance, while I was looking for another job. If you quit, you don't get insurance, you know. So I kind of got myself fired, and then I did a lot of things. My dad died when I was 19, and I had to drop out of college, and I had no direction. You know, I wandered, you know, sort of, you know, like a lot of writers, I got fired from a lot of jobs that I was totally unqualified to take. So I ended up, I lost a job in New York. I was in Western New York State, and it was a really good job. And I ran into the guy who did the original assessments, and I said, "What happened?" Because they kept bringing me back, you know. And he said, "Ray, it came down to you and this one other guy." I said, "So why was I second?" And he said, "He had the degree and you didn't." So I said, "Screw it, I'm going to go back to college." So I was at 27 when I went back to college. I went to Grossmont out in El Cajon for 1 year. And with the stuff I had done before my dad died, I was able to transfer to UC San Diego. And while I was at UC San Diego, actually while I was at Grossmont first, but by the time I graduated, I discovered I could write. And I could hack out BS papers the night before they were due and get A's. So I had some chops. And while I was doing that, I met some other local writers, you know, like Greg Bear, who now lives in, you know, Seattle. But, you know, and through Greg, I met a lot of other writers. And I thought, hey, maybe I'll try this fiction thing. Well, I was working for a nonprofit organization at the time doing marketing and both, you know, actually a pollster. I did political stuff. I got tired of that, so I went over to do nonprofits. And I had a degree in mass market and public opinion. You know, that's what I got at UC San Diego. And we had a tax roll called Prop 13, and all my funding got cut. So suddenly I'm looking for a job. Well, I was about halfway through Magician at the time, and I wrote the book, help from my friends. I had friends who really believed I was doing more than I did, actually. And so I finished it, and my father had been in the business, so I got into contact with his old literary agent who took me on, brilliant man named Harold Matson. And he got me a sale to Doubleday. And I'm still looking for that media job, by the way, but you know, I'll just have to make do with writing until that shows up.
I think you're going to do okay.
I think you're right. I think I may have a future. As far as what's changed, I liken it to muscle memory, a writer's muscle memory. The thinking up ideas and working out stuff in your head, that's just as tough as it was when I started working on Magician. You know, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, and you got to put the hours in. And thank God my subconscious comes up with much more clever stuff than I do. You know, I wake, no, seriously, King of Ashes. I woke up one morning going, "Who's the King of Ashes?" And I went, "What the hell was that?" Pretty sure I didn't do any psychedelics last night. So, you know, maybe it's a little, you know, little TIA, you know, mini stroke or, you know. And then it hit me, I don't know who the King of Ashes is, but that's a good title for a book. So that was the start of that. And, but once I know what I'm doing, the sitting down and writing part of it actually is a great deal easier. I've learned to send the editor out of the room and tell him to come back when I need him and stop looking for that perfect opening line. And, you know, because writing is rewriting, you know, I've seen wannabe writers kill themselves trying to come up with that one perfect, no, just write something. And then when you get to the end, you go back to the beginning and start over. And that's when you start the fine tuning and the crafting. And you look for that clever turn of phrase that you couldn't think about. But stopping yourself, that's what I've gotten out of the habit of. Once I get going, I do. Now, age. I don't do 8 hours in a row the way I did when I was in my 30s. You know, and the COVID thing and the other stuff we were talking about, that does tend to shorten my concentration. As I said, look, what's on TV? Maybe have we started a war yet? You know, whatever. So those are the two answers. There are certain things that are absolutely the same as they were when I started, and there are things that I think I'm better at. And I like storytelling. You know, I did an interview in Sweden, which you can still find on YouTube, where the interviewer was very, very clever, because he basically got into the whole, you know, life story relative to the things that influenced me. And what I didn't even consider until I did that interview was how much of my life was about storytelling, how much of my life was about the narrative, how much of my life was about, characters and what people do. I say sometimes that the reason I love being a writer is that a big part of my experience is looking at people who are doing stuff I would never in a million years think of doing and asking myself, why did they do that damn fool thing? So as a writer, I get to come up with their motive and their background and why they chose to do that damn fool thing.
Do you have any favorite characters that you created, and have you done anything that you really regret to a character, like that you wish you could take back?
No, because characters, see, for non-writers, they get emotionally attached to characters, which is what a writer hopes for, that your reader really likes what you're doing. But they're a function. A character is a function, it's a tool, it's a moving piece, it's a moving part, if you will, of the machinery of the narrative. They serve a function. And if you get to the end where you don't need it anymore, you come up with they exit gracefully and go up to a farm and raise chickens or something, or they die a horrible, meaningless, pointless death or something in between. I get people who say, I was so upset when you killed off. And I go, great, then I did my job right. Because you were supposed to. If you don't identify the character and care about them, then, oh, somebody died, big deal. And then when they say, yes, but and I said, well, no, you go back to the earlier books, he's doing just fine. He's still there. And that's part of it for me, is that, it's the flip side of real life. To my kids, Elvis has always been dead. Okay. In my fiction, Pug is always alive.
It's a good way to think about it. And we've talked about this a lot at the store, is just the joy of rereading. And that's exactly why it is. You always get to come back and see these characters anew and from a new light when you're at a different point in life. And that's just something that you only get from reading fiction, right?
I think so. I think well, okay, there's a line in there. One of my favorite writers when I was in high school and all my life since then is a gentleman named Thomas B. Costain, who is he's a very fine, or he was, he's passed on, obviously, very fine historian. He wrote, I think, what is the foundation book on the Plantagenets, 4 volumes, starting with the rise of the Plantagenets through the War of the Roses to the death of Richard III and the arrival of the Tudors. Brilliant stuff. But he also wrote great historical fiction. And some of his historical fiction turned into movies back in the day, like The Black Rose with Tyrone Power, or probably the worst adaptation was The Silver Chalice, which was Paul Newman's first work ever. The fact that he survived that movie to go on shows you just how talented he was, because it's a really horrible movie with a totally thankless part for him. It was you go see the movie if you're really interested. It's just, but and then I love the swashbucklers. I love, Sir Walter Scott. Ivanhoe is one of my all-time favorite books, and all that stuff. So, it touches on truth. That's what I was going for. It's like history is about fact. Good fiction is about truth. And really good historical fiction and really good fiction, there are histories out there that read like novels, and there are novels that read like history. It's like John LeClair's stuff, Pillars of the Earth, just fabulous book. Makes,
and then some of them end up, some of them end up reading like musicals.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should mention that, because sort of my therapy weekend is I watched 4 movies over the 4th of July. Like a lot of people, I watched Hamilton and immediately came away with, yeah, it was really good, but I wasn't in love with it. I had exactly the same reaction to Rent. I thought, boy, this is really well done. I like the opera better. You gotta like opera. If you don't like opera, La Boheme is going to put you to sleep. And I thought Rent was really well done, but I went, okay, but I'm not following the road show from city to city to watch it like the Rent heads are. the Grateful Dead wannabes, the Deadheads. And then after I watched that, I watched 1776, which is one of my all-time favorite musicals. As a musical, it's not that great. I mean, it got really mixed reviews on Broadway. But emotionally for me, as something that's founded in the creation of this nation and talking about the values that, America is the only nation that was founded on an idea. Think about that. Before that, it was God gave us this power, or this king has a bigger army than we do. I mean, the idea, just what Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal. Well, it's taking us a hell of a long time to get to there. It's a work in progress still 240 years later, but it's still the first nation founded on an ideal. I love that. And then, the negotiation, the way they deal with the question of slavery and the way they deal with the battles that Adams and Jefferson and Franklin went through with Rutledge and Rutherford and those people to get the Declaration signed and say, okay, we're apart from England. That always moves me. So that was my, patriotic 4th of July thing. On the 5th, getting with all the stuff that's going on now, I watched back to back, I watched The Post and All the President's Men. The two movies about when the Post stopped being a little East Coast regional newspaper and became a serious rival to the New York Times as being guys who know what they're doing and defend, our right to know the truth. Brilliantly done films. I mean, I lived through Watergate. I was back in college back then. And so when time permitted, I was in the student lounge at the college, or I was at home watching the hearings on television. And wow, just, I cherish journalism. Some certain journalists over the years have annoyed me, but as a craft, I think it's vital. It's the Fourth Estate is absolutely essential to our freedom as a society.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't have a good transition from that into
just jump
these next
in.
questions.
Be fearless.
So a lot of people want to know, are you ever going to jump back into Midkemia? Are you going to tell the full story of Ashen Sugar?
Already did.
Apologize.
Here's the thing. See, if I do my job correctly, which is often up for debate, but there's some critics out there who think I should be shot for writing in the English language. So, we'll start with that. Yeah, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but then nobody is. To this day, I'm still trying to figure out teenage vampires that twinkle, but hey, I'm still trying to figure out how the Left Behind series ended up on the New York Times bestseller list, because that was really bad writing. Trust me. I mean, I don't think there's a serious writer out there I've met who will defend those works as having literary merit. Being, passionate fodder for the faithful, sure, I get that, But Midkemia and the other stuff, I don't know. I never say never. So there may be new stuff, but when it comes to something like Ashen Sugar, I told you all the interesting bits. I've had people say this to me before. Well, why don't you go back and do a book about the Dragon Lords before everybody else showed up? And it's like, one, I'm not a big fan of prequels. I've done a couple of drop-in books in the Jimmy the Hand stuff, like the one I'm giving away today, Jimmy and the Crawler, which, fine. I mean, but those are sort of like the blank spaces between existing books rather than me going back before Magician. I don't want to write about Bork's grandfather conquering Bosania, and creating the Far Coast. You know, I mean, I mentioned it. So when people say, okay, the Dragon Wars, I go, okay, you read all the interesting bits. You know, what do you want? More warfare between Dragon Lord rivals and more raiding other planets and destroying shit and taking slaves? You got the interesting bits already.
Well, we've got a recommendation here for you. If you want to visit that world again without having to go back totally, have you considered having Pug pop into this new world that you've created? Because he does travel through worlds, you know, just open a rift.
Okay, did you miss the part where Pug died at the end of Magician's End?
I mean, this would have to be a drop-in, right?
Yeah, well, no. Look, I've considered a lot of things. Usually I sober up, promise never to do it again, you know? No, look, you know, I as I said earlier, my characters often misbehave. They just let me think I know what I'm doing, and then they tell me what they want to do. I have some ideas. Nothing that's taken hold yet. I mean, I'm really busting my ass trying to finish Master of Furies with all this other crazy stuff going on. The book was supposed to be handed in September. I'm going to be lucky if I get it in by Christmas. And if I don't get it in soon, it's going to be another year. It won't be a 2021 book. It'll be a 2022. And this 2 years between books things is getting seriously old. And the only reason this one has come out now is because of some production stuff that was going on that just didn't allow it to be released a year after King of Ashes, you know. So King of Ashes came out the way it did late after Magician's End because of some family issues I had. And so it was a combination of like all the bad stuff that could happen lined up to be exactly perfect. So Ray wasn't going to get it in print for 3 years. You know, I like to do a book a year. That's kind of like my goal. And maybe I'll get back to it soon. I hope so. But no, look, I've considered a lot of things. So I'll never say no, but, you know, highly unlikely I'm going to drop Pug into Garn, you know. Now, Nate, I mean, trust him. So you see that guy, he's been dead twice and he keeps coming back. Anyway. I got better.
If Marvel taught us anything, it's that crossover series are really good for sales.
Sometimes. I mean, I've been reading comic books since before you were born. I was, like in kindergarten, and we were pulling boxes out from under, Joe's older brother has a box of comics, military comics with Black Hawk, Plastic Man, Rudy Kazudi, Little Orphan Annie. I mean, stuff that was published in the middle of the 40s.
Are you surprised by how popular things like comic books and Dungeons and Dragons? I know you have a long history with pen and paper role-playing games. Like,
no, I'm not surprised. Look, the guys who are running studios now were reading that stuff when they were teenagers. So that's the point. It's like, I could do an hour and a half just talking about the early 80s in comic books and the sea change in people's awareness. People forget that there was a Doctor Strange TV show. There was a Captain America. Hell, there was a Captain America Republic serial back in the 40s. Superman had like two. There was Superman and the Superman versus the Atomic Monster with Kirk Alyn, playing that character. And of course, the Superman TV show with George Reeves in the 50s that I watched as a kid. So that stuff's always been around. I mean, they made one movie of Prince Valiant. I keep waiting. And I realized that Flash Gordon got kind of a camp thing going, mostly because of the Queen soundtrack, I think. But for those of us who grew up on the Larry Buster Crab stuff, Flash Gordon and the Death Ray from Mars, Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe, that stuff. Those terrible little models with the sparklers in the back, and you could see the wires. I ate that stuff up as a kid. It's why the day Star Wars came out, May 25th, 77, I was down at the Circle. Well, Circle 10 doesn't exist anymore down at Fashion Valley, and nobody was there. I mean, it was like we got the 2 o'clock matinee. We were all, done for classes mostly, and a few of us went down there and just sat there going like this as the ships were going overhead, the very opening, in our seats going. And back at school, back on campus at UCSD, 3 hours later, going, you have to see this movie. It was the absolute fulfillment of everything I ever imagined a science fiction movie could be. When I was sitting and watching Larry Buster Crabbe doing Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, I have a lot of DVDs of that stuff now for my library. Once in a while, I get nostalgic, break something out, watch it for 5 minutes, get bored, and go back to work.
Are we going to get a history book of the early 80s, like you were saying?
I like making money. I mean, it's like I've had a couple of ideas where, I go pitch my editor and she's, terrific editor, and she'll sit there and listen and go, no. Okay.
Do we get to know what those ideas are, or have they been buried?
Well, no, I mean, I've still got some ideas that go back 30 years. I've got an idea for kind of a galaxy spanning empire, Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Frank Herbert kind of, future dystopian, it's a long story, but the short version is I want to do Bo Jess in space. Okay.
I mean, that's what Kickstarter and things like that is for.
No, dude, no. I don't, trust me. No. It's not that. It's not that at all. It's, being a New York Times bestseller and a Times of London bestseller for 30 years, it's simply a question of maximizing my ability to take care of my kids, live in a nice house in San Diego and not in a shack in El Centro, that kind of stuff. So, yeah. And also I like what I do. I've never written a book I was unhappy with writing. I mean, some turned out better than I imagined. A few turned out not quite as good as I hoped, but on balance, I don't feel like I have to apologize for anything I've done. And oftentimes ideas are just that. I keep telling people, everybody has ideas, everybody daydreams, everybody wonders. It's the ability to take that idea and massage it into a story that keeps me working and allows me to do what we're doing right now. I have people out there who I've never met who send me lovely emails now. And before that, they used to send me like regular posts. And, they don't understand how much that means to me. Social media is a whole mixed bag, as we both know. But when somebody says, hey, I read this book and this is what it meant to me, see, I sit here alone. After we're done, actually, at this time, even after we're done, I'm going to pour myself a drink. And then, I got dinner scheduled to arrive in the next half hour. So if the doorbell rings, I'm gone. But I think that what it comes down to is we get our applause really late. Okay, I handed this book in like 8.5, 9 months ago, and people are now reading it. So I'm hip deep in the next one when people start talking about this one. And so it's nice to know that it really does mean something to people, and that, I just try to entertain. I've had people say some interesting things to me about how some of the stuff I've done in their life has been revelatory. And that's both gratifying and a little scary. It's like, I don't want to take credit for, having changed anybody's life. That's not my ambition. But if you write well, I think you touch on truth. And if you touch on truth, it will resonate with certain people.
Well, I'll say just personally that, during this whole crazy pandemic time, that going back and reading Magician and revisiting these worlds has been such a comfort, and like a bright spot in this time to just have your fiction and to enter into these new worlds. Because I just read King of Ashes last week, and it felt, while different, it felt like returning back to the excitement that I felt with Magician, discovering these new lands. So I think Constance is going to pop back in here soon and tell us to stop talking.
Yay! I did it. Off a good conversation, but we are at time. It's been about an hour. Well, it's been about an hour, so I don't like having to end good conversation, but it is about that time.
It just means that we have to have you back very soon
Yep.
for the next book.
Well, hopefully that will be next year. Hopefully,
Yeah.
if I finish it. Hopefully it'll be in the store, you know, and
Yes.
yeah, I have on my calendar when I'm going to come down and sign all these things. So I've also let people know on my social media that, you know, if they get the order and before I actually go down and sign them, they can still get an autographed copy. So, you know, it's when those people say, I called the store and they were all out. It's like, well, okay, he who waits or he who hesitates. That's what.
The early bird gets the worm.
But the second mouse gets the cheese.
That's true.
To be a mouse or to be a bird.
There's a violent implication there that we will not elaborate on too much.
Well, we are going to go ahead and say goodnight to everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, for all the incredible, amazing questions that you guys sent our way. We are going to pick for the winners for the awesome giveaway that Raymond is doing with us. We will email you separately as part of your order when we're shipping those orders out. We will email you and let you know who the winners are. But I think that covers it. We just want to say a huge thank you to everyone and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you for dropping in, folks.
Bye.